We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to give an overview and then ask the panel members to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about what they're doing in this area. But I wanted to start with what I think is really important, which is all of us are hearing a lot about AI in the news, in business shows. AI is a ubiquitous word these days, and applications in healthcare, I think we'll hear about this in a minute, but the applications in healthcare often are cited as one of the most important areas for AI, and given that it's a foundational technology, it's going to touch every aspect of healthcare in the years and decades to come. The years and decades to come is important to mention because a lot of times when we hear things about a technology, about something that's exciting, the assumption might be that it's ready to go. And unfortunately, if there's too much buzz, too much promise about us living to 160, as someone told me recently, Google is promising us to live to 160, or that AI is going to cure cancer, which is what was mentioned recently in another conversation, it could lead to disillusionment when clinicians or people who work in healthcare or people who receive healthcare mention, well, where is this AI that I keep hearing about and I never see it do anything for me? And the reality is that delivering on the promise of AI is going to take time. And some use cases are more available today than other use cases. And setting the right expectations, focusing on things that can immediately provide value and show some benefit to people who work in healthcare and people who receive healthcare could be a nice appetizer for the big, buzzy, cure cancer benefits that are going to come down the road. So what I'm hoping we can do is separating fact from fiction to some degree and talking about not just the promise, but what are the challenges, what is possible today. We're going to hear about the challenges with the data that's needed to create the best AI possible, to provide all the benefits that all of us want. We're going to hear about clinicians who are trying to use some form of AI to improve their decision making. We're going to hear about AI in drug development, but also on the policy side. The stakes are high because our life expectancy has gone up dramatically from 100, 200 years ago, but also we've reached a point where to have the next generation of breakthrough therapies that extend life another 5, 10, 15 years, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So we need help from a technology like AI to achieve some of these intended objectives. And the ripple effect of good health, longer health span, and increased productivity through the economy is enormous. As a matter of fact, McKinsey, in a paper, cited that 30% of all the economic growth since the Industrial Revolution could be attributed to better health. So with that in mind, I'm going to go down starting with Caroline. If you can provide a little bit of your background and talk about what you're doing in AI and your perspective on the quality of the AI models that we're seeing today, and what are some of the challenges?
So my name is Caroline Chung. I'm the Vice President and Chief Data and Analytics Officer at the Anderson Cancer Center. I'm also a practicing clinician, a professor in radiation oncology and diagnostic imaging, and I run a computational imaging lab, so I do actually develop AI models and leverage AI models, but from an administrative and hospital and deployment standpoint, we've also been really building out frameworks which we're lacking currently in healthcare to actually implement AI safely and responsibly for all of our patient care, as well as other decisions that you can make. And so in regards to the data side of things, let's not forget that healthcare is about the humans connecting with humans, and there is a potential for AI to be leveraged to actually better capture data that is useful for machines, because right now what we've been doing is generating data in a way that humans can consume the data, because that is how healthcare has been delivered. We have nurses, clinicians, care providers reading the data, and so it has to be presented in a way that humans can understand it, the way that it can get communicated out to you as a patient or a caregiver at home. It has to be consumable, but at the same time, the needs of the data flowing into these algorithms and AI models is different. And so we need to start to think about what does that mean and how we actually generate the data and what data is available to us. Secondly, the other piece around that is around the privacy issues around this, and I'm sure we'll start to get to that in terms of policy, et cetera. But I think that these are the various nuances, and the quality of the data that we've been capturing today in the EHR, and many of us had this discussion earlier today, is that it's quite different at each place that you go, and yet many of us go to many different hospitals, and so connecting the data from one place to another and allowing that data to be reliably consumed, so whatever models that may be used at those hospitals is really meaningful for you is a real challenge.
How much is large language models and generative AI improving our ability to use the messy narrative data, which before the large language models were extremely inaccessible?
So we're still in very early days when it comes to large language models. Just an example, this has been in the public media, so it's not me making this up, but there has literally been someone who actually asked a ChatGPT or a similar large language model, I won't name which one it was, but basically they asked, how many rocks should I eat in a day? And the recommendation gave you back a number of rocks that you should consume each day because of the way the question was asked. And so I would say that in our current state of the technology, not to say that we'll never get there, in our current state we need to be very careful. The second piece around that is I think many people have replaced machine learning and AI to mean large language models, and that's certainly not the case. There's many different kinds of large language many different kinds of machine learning and AI models that are not large language models that can be very useful for us.
Excellent. So, Mon, unfortunately, you're a cardiologist like me, so we're a disadvantaged group. And when I was writing my book, I focused a lot on the cardiology applications of AI. Not to be biased, but I am biased towards cardiology. And I'm wondering, you're practicing at a world-class institution. Obviously, the Cleveland Clinic is not every medical institution out there, but how much AI are you using in your daily practice? What have you seen? Have you seen any benefit from this AI stuff we all hear about?
Well, first, thank you, and thank you all for being, sticking with us till the late afternoon. I think it's thinning, but thank you all. So as you mentioned, Ron, I'm a cardiologist, and I must confess I don't know almost anything about AI. And as a matter of fact, after talking to Carol and earlier this afternoon, this morning, I almost ran home because I have nothing to contribute other than some minor things and curiosity. I'm actually enrolling in some educational opportunities related to AI and healthcare, because the truth is AI is here. AI has been here. Those of us that are cardiologists, for instance, or any physician in the ER, when you get primitive AI happening there. The EKG will give you, or the machine is going to give you a preliminary interpretation of that EKG. Similarly, I think we're implementing some models where instead of nursing monitoring the EKGs of patients or the strips, rhythm strips in the ICU, we're trying to see if AI could replace that monitoring and perhaps be even more accurate at this monitoring. I'll tell you another example. I read nuclear stress testing, and there's a way where I can give my own interpretation to the machine interpretation. It gives me some semi-quantitative data based on some readings of several hundred nuclear studies by experts that might look like this one, and I often compare my interpretation with the machine's interpretation. And I'll tell you something, I often pay attention to the machine's interpretation because it might tell me something that I might have missed. So AI has been around us. The question is, what is the AI of the future going to look like? And that's where someone like me really does not know.
None of us know where this is going. Yeah.
Some know more than others. But I really think that it is fair to say that AI is here. And if we look 100 years ago and we told someone that you're an average 75 or 80 years old, they might have taken the same attitude that we're taking today, that life expectancy is going to increase in the future. Now, whether AI is going to increase it or something else, I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I'll say one more thing, that in my own practice, where we look at risk models for patients after non-cardiac surgery, we looked at an AI model, which I'm happy to talk about maybe a little bit later. But we were surprised that when the machine told us that the risk factors are slightly different from our own practice, but the machine was more logical than we were. And the machine told us if the patient is old, the patient has diabetes or renal disease or some other major risk factors, those are the ones that might get into more trouble than the ones we were paying attention to, which are the common patient with maybe some blockages and having a stent in the past or some bypass surgery, which turns out to be probably a safer patient to operate on and give him a liver transplant than someone who's older. I'll stop here.
Thank you. So, Michael, I can go walk outside of the Union League Club, walk into a CVS, and buy a bottle of Tylenol and take it for my fever. And I have some degree of confidence that it's going to be safe, that I'm not going to drop from being poisoned. And that confidence works for me, works for CVS, because I assume there's regulatory oversight, and that regulation powers that direct-to-consumer, buying new medications, going over the counter, and so forth. Do we have anything similar to that in AI, where if I'm a hospital, if I'm in the Anderson or Cleveland Clinic, and somebody comes to me and says, I have AI that helps you identify stroke when patients come in unresponsive, identify stroke on a CT scan, or I can read all of your x-rays very quickly and identify COVID. How does a medical institution know that this has been tested enough, something similar to the Tylenol, and says, yes, I'll buy this because if you have the certification, this is safe, tested, and it's ready for prime time in the real world?
So Michael Sagalu with the National Institutes of Health. We're the world's largest biomedical research center and the world's largest funder of academic research. To start approaching the question, one of the things that's less known about us is that every year we enter into thousands of partnerships with innovators, be they companies or other entities like that, for the purpose of addressing global health concerns and also facilitating economic development. So what we do with our partners is try to work towards that kind of an answer. So we have challenges because we're a large funder. So we have the same challenges as a medical doctor in evaluating whether something is valid in the AI space, because we have to make decisions about how we spend tax dollars, and that's a work in progress. And then the companies that we collaborate with internally, basically it's based on the technology. That's the only thing that drives us, is the interest in the technology. And some of our investigators in cardiac and the other 400 diseases that we study, it can be a challenge for them to understand when an AI-based company comes to them whether or not it's a promising solution or not. What we do, though, is we place a lot of bets. So we tend to fund very generously in the AI field. We have dozens and dozens of AI-based collaborations with companies from Google all the way down to 4 or 5 person startups. And what we do with them is, we try to first determine if they've answered the so what question. Like, if your tool does what you say it's going to do, does it really address a significant medical need that is actionable? And if it checks off those boxes, then we can work with them on a project that, for example, involves clinical studies, data sharing. If the purpose is to develop a product that's going to need to go through a regulatory agency, we can bring our sister agency, the FDA, on board with us. For us, it's a matter that we're stewards of the public dollar. So if we're going to collaborate with a company that's let's say trying to do a better predictive model of heart disease, we want to work with our sister agency to indicate that it's likely that that solution will be able to get through FDA approval. Now, even that doesn't mean it's medically impactful, but for us, that's an initial step, and we leave it to post-marketing studies to determine that. So we don't have ready answers to your questions, but we are avid partners, and because we're funded by the taxpayer and not dependent on company dollars, then that allows us to work on what we want to work on and work with who we want to work with, and do high-risk studies, such as some of the ones you determined, to see where AI really fits in the healthcare ecosystem.
Does FDA approval mean you're good to go?
Well, good to go depends on who you're talking to. If you
Well,
can return some investment to your investors, maybe start selling your product. But as the medical experts around here, which I am not, it doesn't mean that it can really solve the problem that you've determined to solve, or even that you have an actionable solution.
Very good. So, Gabby, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but not too long ago, I received a phone call from the former President of the United States, who was very excited. He said, "Ron, I've heard there are these libraries of molecules and drugs sitting in these pharma companies where they don't have the time or the resources to go through these drugs to figure out which ones are good for what disease." However, AI is going to do that. AI could be used, goes through the library and figures out which ones are promising, and also finds targets for them and stuff. How come this is not being done? We can change the world with this. So I have to calm down this ex-president of the United States. If it wasn't an ex-president, I would have said, what the F, what are you talking about? However, drug discovery is an area that's attracted a lot of dollars in terms of investment in AI in healthcare. Billions of dollars. As a matter of fact, a typical round for an AI discovery company is several $100 million, those are mega rounds. Anything over $100 million is considered a mega round. But we don't have much to show for it yet. So what I was hoping, once you tell us what you're up to and what you do, is maybe you can tell us how you see drug discovery, the role of AI in drug discovery and drug development, and are you seeing any benefits in your business and in your work?
Thank you, Ron, and thank you also for having me. I'm Gabby Hanna, I'm CEO of Small Biotech. We have 2 drugs in the clinical trial. One focused on oncology, genetic targeted therapy, and the other is acute pancreatitis. In response to your question, before response, drug development, everyone knows, it is very long and very expensive. And maybe that is the big hope comes in to solve one of the biggest problems, how to bring drug faster and cheaper to market. So to get a drug to patient approved, it takes between 30 to 15 years. And I think the newest estimate is $2.2 billion. So, and also to start, also other information about discovery, how to identify the molecular, you're going to do all the testing to bring it to market, or to do the testing. I'll give you an example from our oncology drugs. We end up with the drugs we're going to get to the patient. We started with 3,000 molecular design. So over 3,000 molecular designing, you have to design it in a way to hit your receptor, to be efficacious, doesn't have any toxic structure, and to be novel to ensure your IP.
Piece of cake.
Exactly. So you have to screen through all of that to get your molecular, and usually that's how to do that screening. You narrow it down from 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, you go down. So that is where the big hope came from, AI, how to process all this information. But also on the other end, what is drug development? Drug development, by definition, is very controlled, small sample of a study. You magnify it on big population to get approved. So, a regulatory and rightly, yes, cannot accept drug to be in theory how to be approved. This will apply usually in small sample, in diverse sample, and then it will apply to big. So on theory, you cannot accept these drugs. It will work, it's safe, efficacious, you cannot accelerate. I think that is where that disconnect came. There's a lot of hope how that AI will accelerate the process and people jump and their hype comes, oh, now I'm gonna do all this process in very short period of time. And I can tell you there's no way until a few companies will contacted me, now I have AI discovery going to make your life easier.
Has it?
It never happened with anyone, okay? So to happen with me yet. So that doesn't mean you still have to do the work. You have to do all the steps. So I think where AI comes is to be help support, but doesn't replace the core work yet. So I think that's part of the discussion. I can see here the theme is still the role of AI in drug development is not yet defined. I think it has a role. It is mostly supportive role, but doesn't replace any piece of the core structures, how we conduct our drug development. Discovery, we talk about discovery is a big part of drug development. The other two parts where AI comes in, it will be the translational, which is how you translate your work, the discovery, in vitro, the animal work to human. That is the component where AI can play. The other component in drug development is the clinical research, where AI might play roles. And the third or fourth way would be on post-marketing monitor drugs. So there is role to the AI. It's not yet defined in drug development yet, but I don't think it will replace any part yet.
Wonderful.
See why I was going to withdraw?
Sorry. So Caroline, the oil for AI developers, the data, and if you want to use AI to improve human health, to manage somebody's health, you need complete data. Having part of the data in Netflix or Amazon, where it's consumer, retail, or entertainment, could work, but in healthcare it's a much more complex process. Now, today, getting healthcare in different institutions means your data resides in different places. So how do you solve for this issue if you want to bring AI to facilitate parts of the process to improve, for example, recommending someone where to seek care when they have issues and they're interacting with a chatbot, or if you're analyzing a piece of data that's, let's say we live in a world where there's a place to receive remote data and integrate it with the rest of your data in one institution. How do you solve for that monumental problem?
So I think this all starts with how are you defining the problem you're trying to solve with AI? So that whether it's drug development, whether it's even in clinical care, what is the question you're trying to answer? If you're trying to answer a question that is long-term, journeying with the patient, then the connectedness becomes an issue. But if you're actually trying to answer a simple question in a moment in time, and you know you have all the data and the answers of whether you're right or wrong as you build out that model, and you're trying to speed up that process. One example is everyone started throwing in data together, and we worked collectively to look at AI models to diagnose COVID. So presumably we had tested these patients, you knew they were COVID positive or negative, and you looked at chest x-rays and CT scans of chest to say whether the patient did or did not have COVID. You could actually accelerate diagnosing people in the emergency room. One of the mistakes that were made, and this was actually discovered by MIT scientists, was that the people who were developing these thousands of AI models ignored the age of the patient. And so what ended up happening is the AI model was trained on pediatric versus adult lungs and discovered the difference between a child's lung and an adult lung, because the children did not present with COVID very early on in the pandemic. So when you throw it into an emergency room, there's adult after adult coming in, all the adults were suddenly being diagnosed with COVID with no lung findings on the scan because it was an adult lung, and this is what so I think that, this is just an example of what we call the descriptors around the data and the metadata, and making sure that you really understand what data are you actually training it on. Does that apply to the context in which you're trying to use the model? So again, simple questions that can be answered in a roundabout way in a very specific context is a very viable place where we can actually start to use AI in medicine. I think everyone is dreaming of that blue skies of AI is going to predict exactly what's going to happen to me and exactly what medication I need when. We're not ready for that yet because of the connectedness of the data and just the way that the data is flowing in the healthcare system today.
Now, interoperability has been a topic since the inception of digital health, which I would put around 2010. That's the first time I heard the term. But it's been discussed a lot. I've found that EHR companies are not very cooperative with that because it's not to their benefit. Also, medical centers are not excited about opening up their vaults. So the question is interoperability the answer, or should we have a national strategy where no matter where you get care, there's a master database where using your unique identifier, your data dumps in that, so all of your data is in one place, no matter where you get care. What is your point of view on that?
I think regardless of whether we end up having a centralized form versus a decentralized, sort of what we call federated, so at the individual centers, the bigger piece is that we can actually understand the data from one place to another. So an example is if we all can travel to different countries and we can convert from currency to currency. We don't have to use one universal currency to make it work. Similarly with healthcare data, you could actually have a situation if you understood how to translate the measurements and the documentation at one center to another, because there's enough descriptors and we know how to convert, we can actually convert the data across and make it usable. It's just right now, we're still in the bartering system and there's no standardized currency at all. And so I think this is one piece that there actually has been more open dialogue of trying to make sure that that interoperability starts to come through, because we're shifting the conversation from saying everything has to be completely uniform to how do we actually convert one to another and make it functional either way.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So, Mon, I often say to people that in cardiology, we've been extremely successful in managing coronary disease, heart failure, oftentimes nowadays with some generic medications. Whereas the amount, and when I was a practicing cardiologist, coronary disease and heart failure made the majority of the patients I saw. However, there are specialties where there's still tremendous unmet need, like oncology, neurology, and so forth. Studying the brain has been extremely more difficult, much more difficult than studying the heart. So my question is, where do you see AI, this big weapon that can come in and analyze large amounts of information, identify patterns, make predictions? Do you see areas in cardiology where we actually have big need? I mean, there's always need, you can always improve things, but where we're in need of a breakthrough like we are with lung cancer and those other specialties that really the progress has been incremental.
Absolutely. But let me just comment on something that we've been talking about, and I really respect and like what Caroline was talking about, that we have to identify the question first, and we have to perhaps keep it simple at this point. So I'll give you an example. Access to healthcare is the biggest problem today that faces our nation and patients around the globe. There are not enough doctors, there are not enough emergency rooms, there are not enough nurses, there are not enough, I can go on. And the cost of healthcare is ballooning, and it's about 20% of almost 20% of our GDP today. But there's a lot of waste in healthcare, an enormous amount of waste in healthcare. In our organization, we see about 30,000 patients every day. And a lot of those encounters are erroneous. They're not the right patient with the right doctor. And so that creates a lot of waste. It creates waste on a personal level, people that are going to the hospital, and waste on a healthcare provider level. So if we can harness, there's not a town hall that our CEO has that people don't ask him about AI. How are you going to use AI to simplify?
That sounds fun.
That sounds fun.
Use AI now.
So, yeah, AI. So, and actually, I think there is a way for AI to make it simple to identify errors, essentially, rather than human. And we're showing the patient, just put the patient in front of someone. That's not a solution. So AI might be that solution that gives us an improved process and simplified access to the physician, or maybe mitigate the need for access to the physician. Where early diagnoses for making or noticing some patterns that this patient may be at risk of suicide, maybe this patient is at risk of, and they need rapid intervention. Now, so I think that's where AI is.
How much do you think a model like that needs to be tested in the real world, like a drug, before it makes its way into the guidelines and the medical community gets behind it? Because it's been patchy.
So you're the expert, but I would say that you start with the simple stuff. How do we schedule patients? How do we find room for them? How do we optimize the use of an operating room, which is extremely expensive when it's empty? You have a crew of nurses, highly educated people, talented people that are sitting doing nothing while some patients are being canceled somewhere else because they don't have access to an operating room. So that's, I think, where AI could be the early tool. We're talking about Teslas that are self-driving, and well, why not schedule patients in a little bit of an easier way. I always say, if you want to fly to Boston, you decide which day and which aircraft, and you can find it, or which carrier. In healthcare, unfortunately, we don't have a similar model, and I'm hoping that AI will be that tool. Now, back to your question, you're talking, cardiology has really made a lot of strides, but now it's plateauing, right? I mean, we're not seeing the next
In a while.
The next innovation is probably going to be in gene therapy, and that's where a human is not able to analyze all the data. You really need a machine to help you out. That's my prediction, at least that's where I see things going. The improved use of EMR, when the machine tells you where the discrepancies are. So take, for instance, in cardiology, we have measures for the heart function, and we measure the heart function by different tools, ultrasound, MRI, and some nuclear, and the numbers are not the same, and sometimes the discrepancy is appalling, not between one hospital and another, or between one floor and the next, in the same hospital, in the same building. And that's where we really need to come to the point where AI is pointing out, now, is it this or is it that? Because it might have some real life implications. We use some tools that prevent death and so on and so forth. So AI, I'd like to be optimistic. I think AI is the future, is going to be a supplemental tool to what we use, and it will come without us even noticing that it's there. We're using it in the office now for scribing. There's not going to be a scribe anymore in the future. Caroline talked this morning about the potential legal challenges, and I'm interested in seeing.
So, Michael, I'm already halfway through my next book, and my next book has nothing to do with health AI. It's about macroeconomics, and one of my targets in the book is supply-side economics, which stipulates you cut taxes, especially for the rich, and then it trickles down to everybody else. And unfortunately, in the last 40 years, we haven't seen that happen. And what we've seen is our public sector investment as a percentage of our R&D go down to less than 1%. It used to be 2% of our R&D is less than 1%. So I bring that up because it's very relevant to some of these applications. A lot of things take years and decades to develop at public institutions before they make their way into the private sphere. And some of these applications with AI are going to take time. They're going to require public funding before they become commercially viable. So I'd like you to comment on how you see the role of public institutions now that AI is, to some degree, the genie's out of the bottle, but the continued support of public sector in terms of funding, but also in terms of using internal resources to work on some of these complex use cases, perhaps drug discovery, in bringing it to a point where it's commercially viable and private investors become interested.
There we go. I have a saying about recent NIH budgets, and that is flat is the new up. So yeah, we've been flat for a number of years, and that's unfortunate because whether you're an academic center or a small business, which is defined as less than 500 people, which in healthcare is a pretty good sized company. The decrease in support really dampens medical innovation, and it's going to mean that there's just less financial lifeblood for these companies. I don't have a great solution because especially with and after COVID, you have a unique situation where now the medical research is politicized and weaponized, and there's distrust of government and vaccine hesitancy and all that kind of stuff. I think what AI has a chance to do is to address the public health anew, and if it can effectively communicate with all different constituencies, show that this is something that can be a weapon for good, and then that can start to break down some of the opposition to innovation that's happened in the public sector, and hopefully, that will mean that early investment by the government and other similar seed stage funders, you could say, goes up.
So in a follow-up to that, Gabby, do you think, because we talked about how drug discovery is a hairy use case, it's going to take a lot of years and a lot of development, even clinical trials. Using it for clinical trials, those use cases are work in progress. Do you see, do pharma company, do you see a lot of the tremendous need for public-private partnerships to drive those use cases? Because private investors, guys like me, have short attention and not very patient. So we do show up after a couple of years looking for a return on our money.
I would say yes, and I would add it as must as well, actually. Drug development, as you said, it's very lengthy and expensive, and this is where the role of an institution like NIH, NCI, academia, government invested a lot in academia, and the drug development, similar to healthcare, is accumulative knowledge. And those institutions is where's the vault where those knowledge is accumulated. So I think that's a must. I mean, not any new company comprised of all the knowledge we accumulated in the last hundreds of years. So this knowledge usually is on those institutions like NIH.
Are you seeing enough investments in those public institutions?
I would say it's not. If I characterize it, always there is lack of money. But I think that's maybe apply for everybody. But I believe one of the biggest problems in academic or public is the mentality how to work with for-profit companies. And I think this morning Steve mentioned a little bit about the relation between FDA with companies, and I served as director of the Development Center for Duke for years before I became CEO of company. So I know the mentality in academia, how to work and approach relation with company. I think that is where the disconnect is.
Well, when I was finishing my training at the Mayo Clinic, my faculty advisor was advising me whether I should go into the private sector or remain an academic cardiologist. He said, do you know why academic jobs are so competitive? I said, no. He said, because the stakes are so low. So, so we have a few minutes left. Why don't we go around and each one of us give a 30 to 45 second departing thoughts. Starting, Gabby, we'll start with you, work our way back.
So I think in terms of AI, I think the AI, there's big hope for AI. I mean, in drug development especially, there's a lot of information. The drug is becoming very complicated, very advanced, and I think the role of AI, it should play part of drug development, but it is not defined, and hopefully it will be defined in short period of time.
So I'm going to sort of figuratively take off my NIH pen for a second and just give an own opinion. Just like we talked on the positive side that maybe it's been overhyped, there's certainly danger that it could also be used for ill, you could say, beyond, before it's really proved itself. And that is, if you're using AI to determine whether a patient will respond to a therapy and it's in front of, say, a cardiologist, what's to stop the data from going in front of a insurer who's trying to decide who to cover and say, you know, we're not going to cover you for that because AI shows that you're unlikely to respond. So, you know, I don't have an answer for that, but that's certainly something that we need to keep involved with. So just like we're trying to educate FDA to keep them up with a rapidly improving field, I don't know who is talking to the reimbursers and payers of the world to make sure they're sufficiently educated.
No, thank you. This is a great point, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to reiterate what I said, but also I'm going to say that most of us don't understand AI yet, and we don't understand the data that comes back to us from AI, and how we have to learn how to verify, how to trust, and how to compare this to our traditional models of delivering care. And only with time, I think we will come to trust this new modality. And I don't think it's a fad. I think some of us heard about blockchain some years ago. I don't know where it is, what happened to it. I never learned it, it's gone now. I know nobody talks about it. AI seems to be here to stay. But you know, again, it's here to stay. It's been around. Many times we start with something assuming that it's going to take us somewhere, and when in fact it takes us somewhere completely different, and that might be a good thing.
I'd go back to, let's really take our time to determine what questions are we actually trying to answer. At the end of the day, healthcare is about people, and most patients, including myself, would like to connect with another human being, and that human connection is part of the powerful piece of healthcare and healing. And so I think we have to start really thinking about how we are actually using this tool. The technology is moving faster than I think any of us can really comprehend and consume it. But it's kind of like, I think it's all of our responsibilities collectively to make sure that this gets launched in a safe way. If we introduced a bunch of Ferraris, although you said most Ferraris would sit in the shop, but you know, if we were to introduce a whole bunch of race cars onto the street and nobody knew the rules of the road, we didn't have any speed limits, and nobody had a driver's license, and we just released this, we would hurt a lot of each other and ourselves. And I think, you know, that's, if you take that analogy and think about what has been released out to the world and what we actually need to put in place are a lot of fundamental pieces, including our collective understanding. And I think this is where we really need to work together to actually, you know, work towards the appropriate level of regulation as well as appropriate level of understanding so that we can use it safely and responsibly in healthcare.
And I'll end by saying that what we have learned from the first decade and 15 years of digital health is that medical centers, pharma companies, the users, the buyers aren't falling all over themselves trying to buy this stuff. You have to come to them with a well-designed solution for a mission-critical unmet need that economically helps them immediately, that doesn't involve invention of new workflows, and the data is available. The number of interfaces is not so many that is task prohibitive. When you analyze the use case from clinical, technical, and business point of view, and it's all points north, that's a good use case to go after, and this is going to be stood up one use case at a time. With that, I appreciate everyone's participation, and thank you.